folks who are having their human rights violated.
Neat. Hello, everyone. In the language of my ancestors, Shagwalgalak, which means our fire is set. Welcome, an invitation. My name is Margaret Foe. I'm the CEO for the Aboriginal Housing Management Association in British Columbia. I am also a 60s Scoop child who was taken away and adopted into a non-Indigenous family and community and raised completely disconnected from my sense of cultural belonging and sense of being. And that's where my background in history has driven my passion and why I've spent as many years as I have in the housing industry, in particular, focused on issues that affect our women, our matrilineal leaders, our girls, our youth, and our gender diverse communities. So in the language of my ancestors, Toyak Sim, thank you to the team at Aboriginal Housing Management Association, and a special thank you to all of our Indigenous mothers, sisters, daughters, and all of the female Indigenous leaders present and past who have helped to shape our futures. Some of the words that I'm going to talk about today will be uncomfortable. They'll be candid, and I make no apologies for that. As a First Nations woman from a long line of ancestors, we have been uncomfortable since colonization. These words, however, represent the voices of not only my organization or the organizations that I'm affiliated with, but the hundreds of thousands of Indigenous peoples across the country who have been dispossessed because of colonialism. They are the words of a generation that are still struggling to see true and meaningful reconciliation become a reality within their lifetime. I have been the CEO for the Aboriginal Housing Management Association for just over 5 years. I'm also a member of the Indigenous Caucus Working Group with the Canadian Housing and Renewal Association, and I am a part of a newly forming national women's leadership table that are raising the profile for the right to housing for our women and gender diverse among the most negatively impacted by the COVID and the ongoing financialization of our real estate market. Overall, I've had a career dedicated to Indigenous housing. I often tell this story about my 28-year-old daughter. She doesn't like that I do it, but I do it anyways. I always tell everyone that my daughter's first words were not mama. They in fact were ama. That is how long I've been working with this organization and fighting for the right to safe, secure, trauma-informed housing, not only for Indigenous people generally, but in particular for our most vulnerable populations. So I come to you today with grave concern and absolute utter dismay at the glacial movement of all levels of government to invest in urban Indigenous housing, full stop. Not to mention the ongoing discrimination against urban women, girls, and gender diverse populations. Just to give you a quick statistical highlight, we know from Statistics Canada in the 2016 census that Indigenous women, girls, and LGBTQ+ people face higher rates of violence than non-Indigenous women and are more likely to experience more severe, potentially life-threatening forms of family violence and are overrepresented as victims of homicide. We also know from the findings of the Native Women's Association of Canada reports that incidents of violent crime are not reported to the police most often. And with this, the reality against Indigenous women is much worse than we all really know. And Red Dress Day is an opportunity for victims and families of survivors to know that they are not alone and that there is support and the development for safe spaces for those in need. So we at the Aboriginal Housing Management Association, AHMA, have a long history of advocating for Indigenous women, girls, and gender diverse peoples. AHMA's transitional housing frontline staff are not only dedicated to meeting the immediate needs of Indigenous women, but they also provide education and awareness and cultural safety training. AHMA is an Indigenous-led organization with women making the majority of our policy, revitalization, training, and capacity pods. Our membership includes 10 transition house members with 5 gender-based violence transition homes, safe homes, and second stage housing throughout urban, rural, and northern communities. And with the release in January of 2020 of our first ever provincial urban, rural, and northern Indigenous housing strategy, AMA has set targets that would increase housing to respond to gender-based violence to 594 new units and supportive housing to 5,400 new units. What we know is the ongoing lack of engagement from government of all levels with urban, rural, and northern Indigenous peoples allows for additional harm to come to those who are especially vulnerable, notably women and members of the LGBTQ communities. One need only remember that housing was mentioned over 200 times in the Missing and Murdered and Girls report to see why housing is so badly needed for those of us that are dispossessed. To wrap things up, and as I said before, housing really is the panacea for all things. We are grateful. I don't have a picture in front of me. Maybe Rosanna will share it, but we are grateful to Satsi Nazial for the beautiful artwork that she created for our organization of this red dress. And I encourage you to all read about it on our website at www.ahma-bc.org. We are also grateful to Rosanna McGregor from the Williams Lake Friendship Center, who created little red dress pins from this artwork to help raise awareness of the ongoing calls to justice for our missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. And so with that, again, I'll say Toyak Sim, thank you everyone for taking a few minutes to listen and learn and share the journey with some of our women leadership across British Columbia. Toyak Sim. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Rosanna McGregor to say a few words.
Hookscham Margaret, in my language, that means hello all. I'm glad to see that you made it through the night. And that really is poignant in this particular awareness campaign that we have so many of our sisters that didn't make it through the night. As we come on May the 5th for our annual awareness for the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women's and Girls Awareness Day, we want to make sure that we go back to the calls to action. And as a friendship center that's been operating a transition house for over 30 years, we know that we have to build relationships and continue on with the awareness campaign. And we refer back to those calls to action very often to ensure that we're continuing to do the work for our sisters. Part of the calls to action was an awareness about the red dress. And in years past, we've celebrated by having the red dress, but unfortunately, I don't have a very good picture of the red dress today. But the point being is that it's we're doing a sticker campaign that we partnered with AMA. We've had the good fortune of being in a relationship with them to provide social housing, the transition house, emergency sheltering for the past 30 years as well here at our Friendship Center. And what we've done is that we've created a red dress sticker that we're putting into the windows as a campaign to let people know that when you see that red dress sticker in your window, that what it means is that we can be approached without judgment, that you can feel safe to speak with us, and that we seek to create a positive and safe space for everyone. We've distributed those through our Downtown Business Association. We've been working with estheticians to create projects where they can help someone that may disclose to them that perhaps you need to just get in a cab and go to the transition house. Perhaps I can give you some information while we're sitting and having our appointment. There's many campaigns that we're taking place inside of our community. One of the other campaigns that we've just completed is that as a part of the calls to action was to bring an awareness to the local RCMP to ensure that our partners there, that we're building that relationship with them. We've created this red dress pin. It's being worn by our local detachment. Every single member has been given a red dress pin to wear so that they're in the same awareness campaign that says, you can approach us and you can feel safe to be able to know that we're going to try and work to create the best interest for you for a safe outcome. I think what the other important information that I like to share is that communication is a real issue here in my region. We don't have cell service 20 minutes over the hill. And so that leads to a lot of isolation. We don't have a very good transportation system. I think that one of my other sisters here is going to talk about that highway of tears, and we know a bit about that. And but I think that that's another real issue for all of us as women. Transportation and isolation, all of those things go hand in hand that lead to the violence. They lead to our women and children being murdered, and still all of our other sisters that are out there that are missing. And I think that we still contribute to these incidents by not continuing to do the work. And so that's what we've committed to here as a Friendship Center, is to try to ensure that we're always making our community aware that murdered and missing Indigenous women continue to be marginalized in the population and overrepresented. And so I really would like to see this campaign pick up. And I think that I've worked with my partner there, Margaret Foe, to ensure that next year's campaign will be even larger and that our message will continue to grow and to be out there. But I also am very grateful for the other strong women that are joining us today to ensure that our message is heard. Cook's Jam.
Tayaksitnin, thank you so much for that, Rosanna. Wonderful words, and I'm sorry, everyone, that we don't have a picture of the red dress that was designed by Satsi Naziel or the pins that were created by Rosanna, but we're working to get that before the end of our video. At worst, you can see it on our website. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Rosalie Morgan to hear a few words from her. Thank you.
Thank you. Hearing about like the Red Dress campaign and knowing the history of it's our Highway 16, our Highway of Tears, you know, silence is acceptance and silence is violence. And this is not just an Indigenous issue. This is society. I remember attending the Highway of Tears symposium in Prince George, and you know, and there was an announcement made there, and that there was no serial killer, and everyone in Prince George were cheering, and everyone was clapping, and my heart just dropped because I thought, we have over 500 missing people, women, children, men, and not a serial killer. So that was like 500 individuals, over 500 individuals. And that hurt because somebody has to know something and no one's saying anything. Hence the silence is violence. You know, I'm a mother of twin daughters. And when I was living in Terrason, I signed them up for self-defense and MMA street fighting, self-defense course. And so I remember talking to the man that was going to train my daughters at the time when they were 15. And, you know, and he was a big burly guy from New York and questioned, you know, well, what do you want done? And I said, well, you know that I'm Indigenous, my daughters are Indigenous, and we are targeted as women. I want you to train them so that if I ever had to find my daughter or one of them, at least I know that they fought hard. That's what I want you to do, is teach them. This is the life of an Indigenous woman, Indigenous mother, Gitsan. because I lost a friend along the Highway of Tears. I'm familiar with some of the faces of them that have not been found yet. And my friend Alberta Williams was the one, and that, you know, it's still there. It's unsolved. But that's how real and that's how close it was for me. And I think about the women who are trying to flee the rural and remote communities, and they stay because there is absolutely no place for them to go. And so they stay. And, you know, and it's like, where can they go? And without being removed from their support network. And who are their support network, but they're the women in their own clan and their father clan as well as their grandfather clans. So that's so important to understand that support network is there and in place for them. And it's true, we fear what we don't know. So we do need to educate, we do need to empower, and we to build connection so that it would be fluid when they on and off reserve. And with social media such as Facebook, there are groups and there are clan groups where people are connected, but there are some that aren't, because of the shame of, you know, okay, this has happened again, and trying to support and getting the grandmothers involved and included and empowered in today's society. And since colonization and the adoption of patriarchy has really, really hurt matrilineal nations. And, you know, I'm really glad that I'm able to sit with women who stand in the light of their true power, and give the voiceless a voice. And we are not stopping. We can't. It's in our DNA to do and to speak and walk in that light. So I'm looking forward to hearing more discussions, and I think that's all I have to say for now. Oh,
I see Rosanna's getting the artwork up to the camera as best she can. Thank you. It's so hard in this virtual world. I think Michelle may speak a little bit to that when she gets to her piece. I know she talked about how we're all still trying to navigate that journey back away from all these Zoom videos and Zoom conversations.
okay.
There's a great picture of it, the artwork from Satsi Naziel, who also has a personal connection to the missing and murdered along the Highway of Tears. And that's what drove her in the creation of this artwork.
Satsi is actually where the clan, my Unistoten family, they are the father clan to her. So
wonderful. Even more connections. 6 degrees of something, aren't we? And there's the wonderful pins that Rosanna took upon herself to create so that we could get this out there a little bit broader in terms of sharing with anybody that really needs to be aware of the ongoing calls to justice for the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We'll make sure you all get some as well. Thank you for that, Rosanna and Rosalie. Michelle?
Kisakikit Gabinisket, Husakit Kokani, Nelson Mayetki. I am with you today from Kiskatkoyet, which is now known as Cranbrook in my homelands, Amakas Tanacha. I am Tanacha, and I share with Margaret a background of being a 60s scoop kid. And something that Rosalie just said about our grandmothers. My children don't have a grandmother. My mother was murdered in 1986 when I was hitchhiking across Canada looking for myself because I was adopted out. And I didn't tell you guys this part before when we were just doing our introductions. 2 young women in Toronto who were, well, one in Toronto thrown from buildings, I held as babies, babysat them. And so I don't talk about them not as a matter of silence, as acceptance, or as violence, but because I'd rather think about them and do things differently for all of them. And one of those is changing my life to be a grandmother for my children's children, to be a great grandma to my children's children's children, and to really think about what happened to my ancestors, that they couldn't be there for me or for my mother. And so she was in the residential school here at St. Eugene's, her and a couple of her siblings. My grandparents they had 7 children, took 4 of them and crossed the line and couldn't come back because they were international felons. And so the children that they left in those schools all died violent deaths, including an uncle. And so when I think about my children and I think about their lived experiences, and my son puts it really well. He was about 7 years old when his grandpa died, who went to Kamloops Indian Residential School. And he started to learn the truth about why his dad was the way he was to my son. And he said, "Mom, the cycle stops with me. I want the cycle to stop with me." And I keep thinking about, where is he going to go to get that support and that help? Where does he go? And now he's in the military and he's coming home. And part of the reason he's coming back is because he's come to recognize he's got things to figure out. But we don't have our warrior societies the way that we used to. We don't have our warrior societies for our men and young women to understand their roles and responsibilities, to be able to respond to, what comes to us, what comes at us. And it's the same for my daughter. She's in downtown Vancouver. She is working her career. She's doing really great work. And, somebody mentioned the estheticians. She's an esthetician and very successful. But it's uncertain, right? Her home, how much she pays for rent by herself because she has a cat, because she has a disability. When I think about it, all of us do. Every single one of us alive has a disability because we have intergenerational trauma and stress. We have historical trauma. We have acute trauma. We have developmental trauma. We have all these different traumas that, just accumulate upon us and in us. And so do our children. And so, when I'm thinking about housing and I'm thinking about these changes and I'm thinking about building awareness, I'm also thinking about the ability to respond, right? Our individual sense of our ability to respond to what comes our way, but also to the opportunity for transformation, to change the life that we are taught or told to live, to change our life to be the one that our ancestors wanted for us. On my father's side, I'm Haudenosaunee Italian, and they have a talk about, you make a good decision for 7 generations. And a lot of those decisions 7 generations ago in my line, maybe yours as well, we didn't have the choice to make those decisions, but we do today. And as women and as men and as all the genders, I'm so frustrated by this his and hers, because I understand from my people, we didn't have those. That's part of the colonialism. And I use those terms and I'm like, they're still bothering me. But we have those opportunities to transform. We have those opportunities to do differently for the 7 generations to come, because we're somebody's ancestor sooner or later. And so I just want to thank you all for inviting me. I'm in my homelands. Like I said, I do the work for the people. I was reminded when I got asked to do this that in 1991, when I guess it was 1990. Yeah, it was 1991. I found my family for the first time. I'm the oldest of 8 children in total. And on my way home, it was the Anishinaabe people, and they followed the jingle dress. They were from that those people and they're ceremonial people. And they listened to my life story and all the daughters, and that woman made me a jingle dress, and it was a red jingle dress. And I was thinking about that today and just the importance of that, at that time in 1991. We talked a little bit before about how, we're just at the point of implementing things that we wrote about in the Royal Commission on Aboriginal Peoples, but also thinking about the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And that took 100 years for Indigenous people to document what it was that was so important for all of us. And so I think we have some really good blueprints, but it's up to all of us to start reading those documents and look at the activities, look at how we can implement that, everything that's in there, because there's lots, we've done a lot of the work already. And so that's how I look at it. And I just keep thinking, there was a time where I would have followed in my mother's footsteps. And I was 24 at the time, and I knew if I didn't stop, I would be following her footsteps. And at 37, I would be dead, murdered. I'm 54. I just celebrated my 54th birthday. And every day I'm like, wow, I didn't think I'd make it this far. I hope my children outlive that ideology that I picked up along the way. So I just want to say thank you. And for those that are listening and taking part in this panel, taking in this panel, it doesn't matter, you need to know your story, and you need to be okay with your story, because otherwise, it's like any trauma, you either transmit it or you transform it. And I hope and I pray for you that you transform it, and that I hope that you have a home to call your own. And I hope that it's safe, and I hope that it's what you and your children need. Kachta.
Yes.
Margaret, I just wanted to add that one of the other calls to action that we need to make sure that we continue to work on is that we continue to advocate for funding so that we can do some second stage housing, so that we're building those safe, affordable places for our women to feel a sense of home. And as housing providers, we know that we have that ability, and we don't want to just always have to be at the mercy of government to announce a funding program. We know that there's a need, and it needs to be funded now. Thanks.
Yes, I agree 100% with that, Tuxton and Michelle, and thank you, Rosanna, for raising that critical point and challenge in truth to our community to continue to fight for what our families and our communities need. I think it's fair to say that I don't believe that anybody can look 6 degrees outside of themselves and not know somebody that is touched by the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls reports, recommendations, and calls to justice. And here in British Columbia in particular, the missing and murdered along the Highway of Tears. I think you've heard from Michelle and Rosalie speak personally around the impacts and traumas that everybody has experienced. And I certainly think that the housing strategy that was tabled in January is a good start to acting on some of those calls to justice. And I think that there is going to be a lot of conversation that we need to do to raise the awareness. And I look forward to mass producing your pins, Rosanna, because I think those are amazing, and they're easy to do, much like other symbolic attachments like the poppy. It's something that can become affiliated with a movement that says we support this, we recognize this, and we continue to raise awareness and education and the calls to justice. I'm curious, Rosalie, did you have any final comments or additions that you'd like to make? I wonder Sorry, guys, that was probably a technical glitch on our end. Go ahead, Rosalie.
Oh.
Sorry.
So this grandmother, they were my first therapists, actually. With every life-altering event, the grandmothers were the ones, and they talked about their role and responsibility and how to stand in the light of our power, because without us, our nations would die because we were matrilineal. Anyway, she talked about how important it was to continually stand, even though if I was standing alone, just keep standing and don't stop. You'll find other women. Truth seekers will find truth speakers. And so she would always encourage me to keep moving ahead and looking forward, and to be able to comfortably visit the pain of the past. And so, through social media, through the Facebook platform, through TikTok, it's like, okay, who do I need to speak to? Who do I need to hear? And there are a number of activists, women across Canada, Indigenous women who just, they educate, they empower, and they present it. And I'm more often than not clapping and like, yes, this is happening, and I'm not alone. And being here right now, like, here in the Northwest, there's that little hesitancy sometimes, and and it makes me feel good. We say "Lu amqadi," my heart's happy, to know that I'm not alone up here, and to know that there is that recognition, because I hear of women who can't go anywhere. They're staying in a bad way, because there is no housing for her to go with her children. And a lot of our women don't have just 2 to 3 children. They have 3, 4 or more, and that's harder for them to leave. And so to recognize that, we do need this. We need this information to hit the rural and the remote communities, because there is help out there and there is the supports. It's just they don't know what it is. And like I said, we fear what we don't know. I don't know if I can do this. I don't know you can. You're not the first one and you're not the last one.
No, amen. And I actually, speaking of women, I had a elder from back east, and she had said to me that she was grateful to have met our organization and the background in my background that explains what Ama was, because she said she had heard of the word Ama, but in her language, Ama means grandmother. And so that was just so poignant and so touching, being a strong feminist leader who's calling on the calls to justice, and one of them being, let's get adequate housing across the spectrum for all our women, girls, and gender diverse people. So thank you for sharing that, Rosalie. Thank you, everyone. Rosanna, Michelle, any last comments before we turn off the video? Michelle?
I forget that I muted myself. I think it's just the reminder that reconciliation is a process, not a destination. I hear it often talked about, that it's a destination, but it's just a process. We're in a cold peace. We're in a situation, a context of cold peace right now. We are often familiar with Cold War, that idea of Cold War, but we're actually in a situation of cold peace. We're all sort of maintaining. And Canada as a context, BC as a context, is not holding very well. And so just reminding people that it's a process, which means there's a certain amount of vulnerability, there's a certain amount of healing, there's a certain amount of calling in, right? Calling in, not calling out, but calling in people to help support those relationships and figure out what is at the heart of the conflict. Because if you can't, there's no reconciliation unless you understand what the conflict is. And more often than not, and even in our own communities and our own conversations as Indigenous people, we're glossing over the conflict. And for myself, I think about the residential school survivors, and I think about what you were raised in and the fact that now you're leadership. And I hope that people are getting support to understand that and to unpack that in terms of leadership styles, because that we're doing it to ourselves. That's on purpose. That is absolutely on purpose. And so as we're thinking about these things, I think we have to think deeper. We need to bring out our cultural models again. People, I don't share my spirit name. I was told not to, but I don't speak my language because I spend my time in ceremony. And that's where I learn my songs. And so for me, it's about understanding that there's not just one way to define how you are as the people, right? The names of the people that you're called yourselves. Tanacha Aksmaknik for myself. There's many ways for us to do that. And I think that's the key of it, right? Being able to bring as many of the different people together and recognizing we have cultural models already. We don't need to reinvent anybody else's or take on anybody else's. We need to really understand that's sovereignty in the moment. That is sovereignty in the expression of, what our ancestors wanted was for us to continue being who we are in our homelands. And that includes, right, doing differently. So I just want to encourage everyone to think deeply about reconciliation as a process to sustainable peace. Sustainable peace, I don't know what that looks like.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for those closing thoughts, Michelle. And I couldn't agree with you more in terms of understanding the process of reconciliation being a journey, not an end destination, so to speak. And one of the things that you're touching on there around the differences in our communities, in our peoples, in our practices, and in our ways lies the real power of what we've been pushing for within our strategy. And that's the recognition that we cannot continue to rely on government of any kind to create and deliver solutions for us, that in truth, we need to be a for Indigenous, by Indigenous approach to modeling that is taking back the sovereignty. It is the self-determination piece. It is saying one cookie cutter doesn't fit all of us, and that every community will have different needs. Every community will have different practices, and any solutions, especially around housing, that get put to ground need to be driven by those communities. Our people need to develop their own strategies and their own programs and their own recommendations based on their knowledge and their expertise in their communities. And so thank you for sharing that. I think it's important for everybody to know that the strategy that we've released that you can find on our website is for Indigenous, by Indigenous. We didn't write it as a staff member. I didn't write it. Our community wrote that. Our communities across British Columbia, over 45 individual communities and stakeholders contributed to that strategy with recommendations on the types of housing they need in their community. And so thank you, everyone. And I look forward to hearing more on how we can support all of our communities, not only here in British Columbia, but across Canada. Toyaksiem. Thank you, everyone.